So advertising and the media does all kinds of things. It can get us to buy, this shape of glasses, and next year maybe we'll buy a different shape of glasses. But it can also be used in all kinds of other ways, such as propaganda. So a very classic thing to do when you're waging a war, or you want to commit genocide, is to say that that group over there is ugly, and therefore you can kill them because they're not attractive. So this is Nazi propaganda. This is an image of supposedly of a Jew, but who was murdered? This is a picture of Anne Frank, a full-fledged human being, not just a human being, and not just Jews, gays and various other people were part of that horrible genocide. And so I think just watching how that operates is really important. And so I have been doing this work, and I have a very particular other little piece of a story to tell. Unfortunately, we had our little delay with the technology, but hopefully you can hang in there for a few more minutes, because I want to take you on another little turn of my story and share with you what happened. And when I was going through the teeth thing, I started to have a relationship with a dentist over the year and a half or so that it took to go through that. I said, I'm doing these programs, and this is what I do, and I showed pictures of myself without my teeth. He said, really? Bring those pictures in, I want to see them. So I did. And he said, you should be doing these programs for people who are going through this. We have people crying in this office every single week. And I said, no, I'm too busy. I can't add some other element, because I want to tell a whole other story that I'm very, very involved in, and I don't want to dilute my my impact and what I can do. And then I came home and I thought about it, and I thought, that's crazy. I'll tell all the audiences my story that I'm about to tell you, and hopefully it will just mean more to them, instead of, that I can't tell it because I can only talk about the health issues and the appearance issues. So I decided that that's what I would do. Now, a friend of mine I was talking to last night said, when people are grappling with this very, this crisis of cancer and all of that, they're not going to be so interested in this other thing I'm about to tell you. And I said, no, I think it'll work. So you'll have to tell me if it does or not. But what I'm going to tell you is that as I have been on this journey, I became very concerned with issues not just of appearance-ism, but racism and how that plays out, and all kinds of bias and intolerance, and bullying and hazing and hate crimes. And a black neighbor of mine was murdered almost in front of my house in 1999 by a white supremacist. If you remember, Ricky Birdsong was the victim, and I live one door from the intersection where he was shot and killed. And that was very powerful and awful and tragic, and just ratcheted up my care and concern about this issue that I've been dealing with. Then, after September 11th and the initial shock, I began to hear just a little bit about attacks that were being perpetrated on Arabs, Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, just, all these innocent people that, because of the shock, of what had happened, somehow they were the new other. So anybody walking down the street wearing a turban, or who looked Arab or Muslim or whatever, and I became very concerned with this issue. And somebody said, oh, you have to go to the internet and see this animation that's a great way to teach kids about what happened on September 11th. So the animation showed this creature called the Binch, like the Grinch that stole Christmas. This is the Binch for Bin Laden. And the poem that goes with is, the Binch hated the U.S. the whole U.S. way. Now don't ask me why, for nobody can say. It could be his turban was screwed on too tight, or the sun from the desert had beaten too bright, and it goes on from that. And I was like, this is a terrible way to teach children about, what happened and why it happened. And in fact, there were, this is another picture of the Binch, but there were in fact people who were being teased, bullied, assaulted, vandalized, arson of businesses, And the gentleman in the forefront of this picture was Sikh, not Muslim. He was a U.S. citizen in Arizona, and on September 15th, 2011, he was murdered in front of his gas station by a guy who said, "I'm going to kill the ragheads responsible for September 11th." And I started researching this whole thing. There were so many hate crimes and so many assaults. And this is another victim. This man was murdered on October 4th, 2001. He was another U.S. citizen in Texas, and he was Hindu and from India. And eventually I felt compelled, like I had reached out to the Birdsong family when that murder had happened. I didn't know them either, even though they lived around the corner from me. But I had reached out to them. I felt compelled, and you know, the internet makes us a community. I somehow figured out how to reach out to some of these families. And I called this man's wife. She was working behind the counter of the gas station where he was murdered. That's her on the left, Alka. And she was in the gas station, and I said, "I'm calling from Chicago. I heard what happened to your husband. I am so, so sorry." And for about 45 minutes, we stayed on the phone, and I heard the transactions of the lottery tickets and the cigarettes and the gas, you know, being paid for. And in between, she would cry. And I would say, "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." And eventually I got to know these people personally and their families, and I went and traveled, and I heard incredible stories about her husband. You could pull into his gas station, his customers told me, you could pull into his gas station without enough money to fill your tank, and you could drive away on the promise that you would come back and pay him. I was like, I never heard of a gas station where, you know, the generosity of this, you know, sweet man who was murdered, perfectly innocent man who was murdered. The man on the right I also met, and he didn't know the family before the murder, and he is Muslim and from Pakistan. And you know, there's this historic rivalry between Indians and Pakistanis and Hindus and Muslims, but he had a gas station down the street, and he thought, you know, this could have been me. This could have happened to me. So he made it his business to become like a guardian angel to this family in extraordinary ways. And now when I hear all the anti-Muslim rhetoric that's like the fashion of our day, I always think of Sam, because when people say the words Muslim male these days, a whole set of associations start tumbling into your brain, terrorism, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, I know Sam, I know the individual, getting past the stereotype and the fashion of the moment. And speaking of fashions of the moment, I could, you know, bring a whole class time's worth of examples. This is just one, this barbecue restaurant that says safest restaurant on earth, no Muslims inside. And, you know, there's so many examples, really, I could bring 1,000 examples. I could keep you here all night long with unbelievable, you know, things from the media on this issue. And a boy came up to me at the end of a program I did in high school, a local high school, and said, just quietly to me, said, "Thank you so much for what you're doing. I'm Muslim, but nobody here knows it." And that spoke volumes to me, and, you know, reminded me of when I was a child reading Anne Frank's diary and wondering if I had been her neighbors, would I have had the courage that they had to support that family and to put myself on the line for her, and how people throughout history have had to pass, whether, you know, blacks had to try to pass as whites in order to survive, Jews had to pass as non-Jews, you know, all of the times when your safety was at stake. And so to an extent, I think we all try to pass as, you know, better than we think we look, or better than we think we are, to be safe, to be accepted, to be, you know, thought well of.